Apologies. Ah!
You expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Picture this. It's Friday and you just got off the school bus, breathing in that sweet autumn air. You run into the house and straight into your room. You consider doing your homework, getting it done early so you wouldn't have to worry about it for the rest of the weekend. Yeah, you consider it. Till half a second later when you say, "F that," throw your stuff on the ground, and kick back on the couch to peep your favorite horror movie. Hopefully I drew a very nostalgic image in your mind. If not, I might be a freak because there were many weekends in the fall that started out exactly how I just described it in my high school years. I've been interested in and watching movies my whole life, but my passion didn't really start until I started watching horror movies. I wouldn't consider myself sheltered as a child, but I wasn't allowed to watch horror movies when I was younger. Makes sense, seeing as how I was a very neurotic child that was known to be scared of everything, including my own shadow. That all changed, however, during the summer in between 8th grade and my freshman year in high school. That's when my dad introduced me to the Saw series, as well as the horror genre as a whole. Needless to say, I haven't looked back since. The MCU might be my favorite film franchise, but the horror genre is where my heart truly belongs. So, with the spooky season quickly approaching, I thought I'd rank another round of films this month. This time, however, I thought I'd take a moment to rank and discuss my top 10 favorite horror movies. Remember, the horror genre is massive with countless films to choose from. That being said, keep in mind this list is just my opinion and only accounting for my taste. So feel free to tear apart my opinion in the comments below. Now, on with the ranking. Number 10. I knew very early on, while compiling this list, that I wanted to include a Saw movie. This was one of the first horror franchises that I fell in love with after all, and I have my dad to thank for that. Hands down, the best movie in the series, in my opinion, is Saw 6. This is where the rivalry between Jill and Hoffman starts to ramp up, and the FBI are working harder than ever to unmask Jigsaw's latest progeny. We also finally learn the truth behind Amanda's mystery note from Saw 3, and it does a great job at explaining why she acts the way she does in the closing moments of that particular film. I was also a huge fan of the major collection of traps in this one as well. With the subject being head of a health insurance company, it really does a great job tying it back to John's past in a way that a lot of the films don't, in my personal opinion. Also helps that it includes a fan favorite trap in the shotgun carousel. Seriously, what a cool trap. Finally, it all culminates into what is probably the best twist ending that I personally think the series has given us to date. It's a solid gore fest that is a blast to watch front to back. I highly recommend it if you've never seen it before. Number 9. I go back and forth a lot when it comes to my favorite Halloween movie. For years and years, I've always considered my favorite to be Halloween 4. And that could still be the case. I watched it recently and it still holds up in my opinion, except for maybe Michael's mask, but mask quality is pretty off and on from film to film anyway. However, what Rob Zombie's mid-2000s take on the John Carpenter original has over the fourth film is the soundtrack. It totally makes sense, doesn't it? Rob Zombie's been an icon in the music industry even before he tried his hand at directing horror films, so he most definitely has the connections to compile a damn good soundtrack. And this film delivers. This is also the movie that really frames Michael as this truly brutal force of nature. His stabs have weight behind them, and you can hear him grunting with every move he makes. He's a truly scary character in the zombie films, despite my feelings on Halloween 2. I know this film gets a lot of hate for the simple fact that it gives something of an origin story to Michael, which I know a lot of Halloween fans don't like. However, it doesn't bother me as much. Solid slasher, but not enough to make it any higher than number 9. Number 8. Speaking of solid slashers, here's an example of a very underrated slasher. Up to this point, I've been trying to avoid spoilers. I like to think of these rankings and top 10s as me giving my personal recommendations for films, and I would hate to spoil a movie that I recommend you to watch. However, in order to speak about why I love the sequel, I'm gonna have to spoil the original Psycho, so if you want to avoid spoilers, skip to this time code for number 7. As far as sequels go, this one is by far one of the best. Taking place 13 years after the original, which is the same time gap between the release of the films, we see Norman Bates getting released from the mental hospital. He works hard to move forward from his sordid past, but that's when Mother seemingly comes home. This movie does wonders humanizing Norman and really makes you wonder if he is taking on the mantle of Mother once more, or if it's someone f***ing with Norman. Which is it? Well, I guess you'll have to seek out this masterpiece on your own and find out. Number 7. This movie seemingly came out of nowhere for me. When I saw the trailers, it didn't interest me all that much. I opted to skip a viewing in the theater and didn't see it until it eventually came out on DVD. After that initial viewing, though, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't kicking myself. I absolutely love this movie, and I wouldn't be overselling it if I said this is hands down my favorite horror comedy of all time. After over 10 years later, I'm happy to say that this still holds true today. It boasts a phenomenal cast that includes Thor himself, Chris Hemsworth, and Jesse Williams of Grey's Anatomy fame. However, the spotlight is stolen by Fran Kranz, who gave the world my absolute favorite character in a horror movie.
People in this town drive in a very counterintuitive manner. That's what I have to say.
You're not bringing that thing in the Rambler.
What? A giant bong in your father's van? What are you, stoned?
Unfortunately, I can't say too much more without spoiling anything. Great movie, definitely check it out. Number 6. I'm sure that it's because I discovered it later in life, but I'm going to go ahead and drop one of my patented hot takes here. The original 1990s It miniseries is not that scary. I respect what Tim Curry did with the character of Pennywise, but I wouldn't call him scary. If anything, it's rather silly. My best memories with the original is getting together with my best buds, cracking open our favorite beer brand beers, and really making fun of this version's many shortcomings. What Bill Skarsgård did with the character, however, is a completely different story. When you put the two performances next to each other, it's like night and day for me personally. I also prefer the 80s setting over the original 1950s. The cast of kids here were also great, considering how hit and miss kid actors can be. The standouts being Jaden Martell, who went on to be in the 2019 masterpiece that was Knives Out, and Stranger Things superstar Finn Wolfhard. And though a lot of people weren't too keen on it, I also think that 2019's It Chapter 2 was a more than worthy follow-up with adult actors that I can 100% believe were grown-up versions of these kids from the first. But the first one is by far the stronger of the two. Definitely see both if you love the original and haven't seen these remakes for whatever reason. Number 5. Remember how I said that Cabin in the Woods seemingly came out of nowhere for me? Well, X most definitely came out of nowhere. This movie is nasty, but that kind of plays in its favor, really. This is probably one of the most solid slashers we've seen in recent years, in my opinion. With a cast that is surprisingly stacked for the kind of film we're working with here, horror superstar Jenna Ortega, Brittany Snow, and rapper Kid Cudi round out a cast that is a blast to watch get slaughtered. The kills are disgustingly brilliant, a fun watch for those who love gore in their horror. However, the most impressive performance comes from star Mia Goth. Much like Jenna Ortega, Mia has proven that she can hold her own in the genre, and this film is a very big reason for that. Her playing both the protagonist and antagonist is amazing. The scenes where Maxine and Pearl interact with each other are executed very well, and it genuinely feels like there are two separate actors interacting with each other. That's not even mentioning the fact that not too long after this film was released, a very successful prequel called Pearl came out of nowhere. It was just as good as this one. If Maxine is nearly as successful as its predecessors, then we have the makings of a new classic horror trilogy on our hands. Number 4. This film just oozes early 2000s cheese in all of the best ways. Despite never watching a lot of these movies when they initially released, I feel a certain nostalgia for that era of horror. I don't know, something about the style of filmmaking and just the entire vibe that era just feels familiar. I was in elementary school during those years, and that era just symbolizes a time of simplicity that you lose as you become an adult. This movie's a great example of the vibe that I'm referring to. With a cast that highlights the era, the film gives us delightfully passable performances from Tony Shalhoub and Shannon Elizabeth. I constantly come back to this film, however, for Matthew Lillard as the psychic Dennis Rathkin.
No! Wait, no! What are you doing? What did I just say? Did I just say there's a petting zoo downstairs? No! There are ghosts downstairs, Arthur. Right.
Also, big props to the home video release of this film, including special video bios for each of the ghosts. If I had to give one criticism for this film, it's that the actual movie itself doesn't give enough enlightenment on the spooky spirits, so I definitely appreciate the fact that they added that into the DVD special features. Lillard's performance, combined with the designs of each of the ghosts that the Kritikos family comes across in this spooky tale, makes it an instant horror classic in my book, and I will continue reaching for it if I'm looking for an entertaining ghost flick. Number 3. The Child's Play franchise really found its footing with this one. I'm sure I'll take some heat by saying that. Look, I'm not saying anything bad about Child's Play 1 through 3. They're great movies that I have a lot of fun watching. I just really think that the series serves much better when you highlight the goofiness of the concept, and Bride of Chucky serves as the best version of that as far as I'm concerned. It's a shame that they took the goofiness from this one and completely jumped the shark with it in Seed, and then overcorrecting it by making Curse a little too serious. This is peak Chucky in my opinion. I really like the addition of Jennifer Tilly's character Tiffany. I haven't been a huge fan of what they've done with the character since. She's really annoying in Seed, and Jennifer Tilly was completely wasted in Cult. I don't know, I just think Bride was a sign of what could have been, but wasn't. The only complaint I could levy against this film is that the two protags were kind of on the boring side, but at least they have the aspect of them being the yin to Chucky and Tiffany's yang. This is the film that brought Chucky to where we truly needed him to be, in my opinion, and I just wish it stayed there. Number 2. This movie f***ed me up as a kid. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Despite not being allowed to watch horror movies as a kid, that doesn't mean that I didn't pull a little sneaky action and give myself nightmares to satisfy my own morbid curiosity. This is one of the films I was lucky enough to discover rather early on, or unlucky depending on which me you're speaking to. This film traumatized me the first time I saw it. However, I like to think that subconsciously I knew what kind of masterpiece I'd just watched. Clearly that was the case. I mean, I'm here right now talking about my favorite scary movies, and here I am putting it at number frickin' 2. The chemistry between Justin Long and Gina Davis is great. You really believe that they're just siblings driving down a remote country road just trying to get home. The Creeper himself is also a highlight. Jonathan Brecht does a wonderful job portraying the mysterious villain of this film, and I really like how the Creeper's identity is mostly shrouded in mystery for most of the movie. You can really tell when they transition from act to act, as each one seems to take on its own genre. Act 1 being a f***ed up road trip movie, Act 2 taking the form of a slasher movie, and then just going full-on creature feature with the final act. This is unironically a childhood favorite of mine, and I definitely recommend it. Now, before we get to number 1, I'd like to give a shout out to some honorable mentions.
Then why don't you show your face, you coward?
My pleasure.
Number 1. What can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said? Honestly, probably not a whole lot, considering how iconic it is. This was another one of those movies that I discovered much too young on cable TV. Unlike Jeepers Creepers, however, it didn't seem to mess me up nearly as much as the number 2 entry. I could just tell there was something special there, and almost just as quickly, the name Fred Krueger left my consciousness. After I officially got into the horror genre in high school, I finally got around to watching a little slasher classic from my generation called Freddy vs. Jason. Fell in love with it, and went back to rewatch all of the classic Nightmare on Elm Street films. I haven't looked back since. It wasn't until then that I started to learn about how it was directed by legendary horror filmmaker Wes Craven and about how innovative it truly was for the time. Also, you know that I can't bring this movie up and not talk about Robert Englund as the man of your dreams, Freddy Krueger. It's a performance that'll stand the test of time, and that's shown over and over again by how many fans of the series beg for Robert to put on the glove one more time. I personally would love to see New Line go the Legacy sequel route with Robert as Freddy and Heather Langenkamp returning as Nancy. I think that with how long it's been since the remake came out, Nightmare fans are due for a new scare. It's not my favorite film in the series, mind you, but with what it's done not only for my favorite horror series, but the horror genre as a whole, it deserves the number 1 spot on my top 10 favorite horror movies. The horror genre is probably one of the most versatile genres out there. It has countless subgenres within it, and in some cases, subgenres within the subgenres. Whether it's a crazed serial killer, a man-eating alien, or something of the supernatural variety, the genre will always be there to provide a spine-chillingly good time for those who seek it. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked what you saw, please be sure to hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already to keep up on all of the new reviews, essays, and rankings that are sure to come. The cool thing about the horror genre is that it's so massive that it's very likely that no 2 people will have the same list. That being said, please be sure to leave your top 10 down in the comments below. Next month is the spooky season, and I have a very spooky review coming very soon for a horror movie that I hold near and dear to my heart, so definitely be on the lookout for that. Thanks again, Cinephiles, and until then, don't stop believing.